After several interactions and doing some research on the circle of friends, which are seeing installed as camera systems in people's houses who small-time dealers didn't really need the whole 12 camera, 8 camera setups. I looked into the federal government here in the state of Ohio and some of the battle plans they had for drug dealers and find them unconstitutional and also find them liable for any overdoses or deaths that happened because of the information leaked from the inside of these circles of friends. And I won't get into it, but there's several overdoses and there's several questionable deaths when it comes to what I'll call quote unquote snitching. I would call it community service. The USA Patriot Act broadly expands law enforcement's surveillance and investigative powers and represents one of the most significant threats to civil liberties, privacy, and democratic traditions in U.S. history. The Act, in its current form, gives sweeping search and surveillance to domestic law enforcement and foreign intelligence agencies and eliminates checks and balances which had been the difference between the free world and the rest. That difference previously had courts the opportunity to ensure that those powers were not abused. Patriot and follow-up legislation, now in development, threatened the basic rights of millions of Americans. And as it turned America into a suppressed state, a new bill introduced this in the 110th Congress. It's designed to extend the U.S. Patriot Act, allowing what many experts say are illegal provisions, in which will continue to allow the FBI, DEA, ICE, ATF, U.S. military, and other federal agencies to spy on, investigate, and arrest innocent civilians. The law, because of the Act, allows for the violation of American constitutional rights that our forefathers did not intend. Constitutional lawyers all across America say that the Patriot Act should be repealed, not reinstated. President Bush signed into law the earlier renewal of the controversial Patriot Act on December the 30th, 2005. As the provisions were due to expire, they were extended with Public Law 109 through 160. That pushed the date from December the 31st, 2005 until February 3rd, 2006. The date of expiration was again changed from the February 3rd, 2006 until March 10th, 2006. The original Patriot Act was passed into law on October the 24th, 2001 by the Congress of the United States, just 45 days after the September 11th attacks. With few congressmen even reading it and virtually no debate, there are significant flaws in the Patriot Act. Flaws that threaten your fundamental freedoms by giving the government the power to access your medical records, tax records, information about the books you buy or borrow without probable cause. And even worse, the power to break your door down at your home at any time of the day or night and conduct unconstitutional searches and seizures. Or if you're lucky and are not home, they can search your home or business in secret without telling you for weeks, months, or even indefinitely. According to the Electronic Frontier Foundation, the law dramatically expands the ability of states and the federal government to conduct surveillance of American citizens. The government can monitor an individual's web surfing records, use roving wiretaps to monitor phone calls made by individuals, proximate to the primary person being tapped. Access Internet service provider records and monitor the private records of people involved in legitimate protest. Patriot is not limited to terrorism. EFF writes on their website, they point out that the government can add samples to DNA databases for individuals convicted of any crime of violence. Government spying on suspecting computer trespassers, not just terrorist suspects. And all of this and more requires no court order. Wiretaps are now allowed for many suspects violating of Computer Fraud and Abuse Acts. Offer possibilities, government spying on and monitoring any computer user searches, emails, and in fact, record every stroke on any computer. Foreign and domestic intelligence agencies can be more easily spied on Americans. Powers under the existing Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act have been broadened to allow for increased surveillance opportunities. FISA standards are lower than the constitutional standard applied by the courts in regular investigations. Patriot partially repeals legislation enacted in the 1970s that prohibited pervasive surveillance of Americans. Patriot eliminates government accountability, while Patriot freely eliminates privacy rights for individual Americans. It creates more secrecy for government activities, making it extremely difficult to know about the actions the government is taking. Patriot authorizes the use of sneak and peek search warrants in connection with any federal crime, including misdemeanors. A sneak and peek warrant authorizes law enforcement officers to enter private premise without the occupant's permission or knowledge and without informing the occupant that such a search was conducted. The Department of Justice, with little input from Congress and the American people, is developing follow-on legislation. The Domestic Security Enhancement Act, nicknamed the Patriot II, which would greatly expand Patriot's already sweeping powers. The federal government has turned American freedoms into a worldwide mockery with their unchecked spying on ordinary Americans. Part of a broad pattern of the executive branch using national security or suspected terrorism as an excuse for encroaching on the privacy and free speech rights of Americans without adequate oversight. It eliminates many protections against unlawful imprisonment, and now many rights. U.S. legal systems are absent, such as the important right of habeas corpus. As written, the Act violates due process for all Americans. All the president has to do is call a citizen an enemy combatant, and the person's due right processes disappear. The U.S. government says that U.S. citizens can be detained and then tried in secret trials in absentia and can use secret evidence that the accused cannot see nor challenge. If evidence is obtained by coercion or torture, government lawyers contend that it should still be allowed as a basis for conviction, thereby erasing 300 years of Anglo-American jurisprudence. You should be very uncomfortable with the collection of your records by the government, which are using the Patriot Act to demand your Social Security number and other private financial or medical information by order of secret courts, and the muzzling of those citizens who receive such orders from speaking publicly about them. This is a violation of both the First and the Fourth Amendment. You should also oppose the collection of both private and business records by banks, pharmacies, and other businesses which are using your Patriot Act to demand your Social Security number and any private, financial, or medical information. Criticism of former President Bush's admission that he had received warnings only weeks before September 11th has made it more important to understand the origins of the act. There has never been a more urgent need to preserve fundamental privacy protections and all systems of checks and balances than the need we face today. As illegal government spying provisions of the Patriot Act and government-sponsored torture programs transcend the bounds of law and our most treasured values in the name of national security, and just the allegation of suspected terrorist activity, be it true or not. The current act that was extended and updated, you can read online at www.epic.org. Financial transactions. The sections of the President Patriot Act that deal with the financial transactions fall under Title III, which is also known as the International Money Laundering Abatement and Financial Anti-Terrorism Act 2001. It stands on its own as a separate act of Congress, as well as being part of the Patriot Act, and is amended versions of the 1986 Money Laundering Control Act and the 1970 Bank Secrecy Act. The earlier acts tended to focus on preventing money laundering and international cash flow as it related to the drug trade, to gambling, smuggling, and other types of criminal activity. In the 2001 version, the focus has shifted towards money laundering as a means of financial international terrorism. The current act encourages financial institutions to collect certain data to identify customers and their transactions in case of any activity being flagged as suspicious by government agency. Suspicious in most cases means involving any foreign nationals or corporations. The Patriot Act considers any such accounts or transactions worthy of intense scrutiny, although the scrutiny will, of course, be more severe for certain nationalities than for others. What if you are born a U.S. citizen and do not have an arrest record and are not involved in any type of activity that is criminal? If you just like to open a bank account or engage in another banking transaction, can a bank force you to provide your Social Security number? How about fingerprinting you? Is either of these strictly required by law? Not exactly. Although if you do not wish to provide your Social Security number, you will have to obtain an alternate taxpayer identification number. This information, along with your name, address, and date of birth, is used as part of the required customer identification process program, used to verify customer identity and to compare customer information with lists of known terrorist suspects. Such information may also be required by other money service businesses, such as currency exchanges, all having the effect of financial institution acting as agent to and for the United States government. Fingerprints are not a requirement for the Patriot Act, and they are certainly not required by financial institutions. So if your bank insists on this procedure, you may wish to take your business elsewhere. Cash transactions. Cash transactions are certainly not prohibited, but they bring more government scrutiny, and they are now more inconvenient for certain vendors to process. If you deposit, withdraw, or make a purchase involving more than $10,000 in cash in one day, the other agency involved has to file a currency transaction report with the IRS. That report's details such as your name, address, and taxpayer identification. If you purchase over $3,000 of traveler's checks, money orders, or cashier's checks, such a transaction will also be reported to the IRS via monetary instrument log. And you should you engage in any activity that indicates you may be engaged in money laundering or otherwise violating the law. Your transactions may even trigger your being put on the no-fly list and the suspicious activity report called the SAWS report. The SAWS report will be filed without your knowledge. It is, in fact, of the SAW that your knowledge would compromise the subsequent investigation. If you want the Patriot Act to be repealed, you should immediately write your congressperson and express your concerns. If you and millions of others don't, America's leadership in freedom and many of our own basic freedoms and liberties will be a thing of the past. That is an article by Michael Webster on renewamerica.com. I'm going to follow it by letting you know that I used to work for Pilot. We all know Mark Hazelwood. We know what happened at the Christmas party. What if Mark Hazelwood was a terrorist? Or better yet, what if he was a racist? What if Mark Hazelwood had an affair and wanted to get even with the husband or vice versa? This is too much power that's going into these reports secretly into the government to declare war on someone for terrorism. Terrorism could be defined as many things. What if terrorism is a breach in the contract to the farming community? What if it's a deal made under the table back in the 1960s by James Rhodes, the governor of Ohio, Corwin Nixon, George Hinkle, Vice President Seminarelli of Marathon, Senator Steve Wilson of Ohio, or Mark Hazelwood of Pilot and Cleveland Browns fame? The good old boys club can't run this country. You have to let everyone play on the playing field fairly. These are things that we need to watch in this country before we fall into another pitfall like Germany did back in the late 20s and early 30s. When the SS was irritated, the young people were uneducated, they were frustrated, and they were led to slaughter segments of society like they are now. First declaring war on all other nationalities, then turning on the homosexuals, turning on each segment of religion, until finally there was nothing left but the white, blonde-headed, blue-eyed German soldier, considered to be the premier of all human beings in the eyes of the SS. We are dangerously close, ladies and gentlemen, to committing the same atrocities. You can listen to it on the news. But I tell you this, if you go through my articles, you'll see these white supremacists can be stopped if we can take the time to look. From 1950s late until today, I have developed a case that will show you how critical it is to pay attention to who's funding these terrorists like Trump as they go into the White House, burglarizing it, and then saying that they're going to commit first-degree murder, that they have plans of it, and it's overlooked by the attorney generals. I haven't overlooked it. I've got it all. I just need representation. I need a publicist, and I need one good journalist to interview me. Thank you.